Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. If you're new here, thanks for stopping by. Today's content is a bit different from what I usually post. Normally I focus on iceberg videos and deep dives, but this time we're exploring unexplained Reddit stories. Tales that are unsettling, scary, and downright mysterious. Whether you're a fan of creepypastas or not, these stories are absolutely worth your time. They're chilling, well-crafted, and genuinely disturbing. So grab your headphones, get comfortable, and if you enjoy this type of content, consider subscribing. My goal is to reach 300,000 subscribers this year, and your support means everything. All right, let's dive into our first story. The Watcher in the Attic. I asked the child I was babysitting, "What do you think hides out there in the darkness?" She whispered back, "My father. He watches from the trees." I'd been babysitting throughout the autumn to save up some money. Initially, I worked for families recommended by friends, people I knew and trusted. But as my expenses grew, I needed more gigs. That's when I posted an advertisement online. Within days, I received a response. The family resided on the outskirts of town, their property backing directly onto dense woodland. What immediately unsettled me was the isolation. No neighboring houses for at least 2 miles. Just their home pressed against the tree line like it was trying to hide. My first impression when I arrived was actually pleasant. The house had character, a renovated farmhouse with charm. There was a vegetable garden out back, enclosed by a weathered fence with a gate opening onto a forest path. String lights hung across the patio, and there was an old wooden swing near the property line. The main living area featured an enormous window overlooking the woods. During daylight hours, the room flooded with natural light. The kitchen adjoined it, with countertops positioned beneath another large window, decorated with hanging plants and those generic inspirational signs. "Family is everything, and love lives here." That kind of thing. Upstairs contained just 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. There was also a small attic space accessible by a pull-down ladder, its single window also facing the forest. I found it odd that every window seemed oriented toward those trees. The child was around 6 years old, a girl named Emma. She was remarkably quiet, almost unnaturally so. Not shy exactly, just absent somehow. She'd respond when spoken to, but never initiated conversation. She wasn't difficult or sweet, just blank, like she was somewhere else entirely. My routine became predictable. Arrive at 7, give Emma dinner, supervise some quiet play, then put her to bed by 9. Afterward, I'd have the house to myself for 3 hours until the parents returned. And yes, I'll admit it, I snooped. It's not something I'm proud of, but the boredom was crushing, and I've always been curious about the lives people lead behind closed doors. It was probably around 11:30 that first night when I was exploring the master bedroom. I'd been examining their bookshelf, mostly self-help books and thriller novels, when I picked up a small music box from the dresser. It was delicate, made of dark wood with silver inlay. As I turned it over in my hands, watching how the lamplight caught the metalwork, something changed. The light suddenly dimmed. A shadow had fallen across the music box, creeping across my hands and up my arms. It wasn't just a shadow, it was massive, consuming half the room. I couldn't identify its source or shape. It simply existed, this dark presence that shouldn't have been there. Someone was outside the window. My rational mind said it had to be a bird, maybe a large owl passing by. That would explain everything. All I had to do was look up and confirm it. But I didn't, because what if it wasn't a bird? What if looking up meant making eye contact with whatever cast that shadow? I stood frozen, barely breathing, until finally the shadow passed. The music box caught the light again. I exhaled, slipped the music box into my pocket. I know, stealing makes it worse, and quickly left the room. Something told me not to snoop anymore that night. Downstairs, I turned on the television and tried to distract myself with some mindless show. Around midnight, I heard creaking from upstairs. Old houses make noise, I knew that. But this felt different, deliberate. Footsteps, maybe? Against my better judgment, I went to investigate. The house was dark and still. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step groaning under my weight. When I reached the second floor, both bedroom doors stood open. I peered into Emma's room. Empty. The bed was disheveled, but vacant. "Emma." My voice cracked the silence like breaking glass. "Emma, where are you?" That's when I felt it, the overwhelming sensation of being watched. I turned slowly and saw the attic ladder had been pulled down. The opening above showed only darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to leave immediately, but my responsibility to the child overrode my fear. What if someone had broken in? What if Emma was in danger? If I'd only looked at that window earlier, I'd know what I was dealing with now. "Emma." My voice was quieter this time, almost a whisper. "Yes." The response came immediately from the attic, thin and distant. "What are you doing up there, sweetie? It's very late. Your parents will be home soon." No response. I placed my foot on the first rung of the ladder and began climbing. With each step, my eyes adjusted to the darkness above. The attic was cramped and musty, illuminated only by pale moonlight streaming through the small window. I could make out Emma's small silhouette against that window. "Emma, you're scaring me. What's going on? What are you looking at?" She didn't turn around. I approached carefully and knelt beside her, following her gaze out the window toward the forest. From this vantage point, I could see their backyard, a patch of grass that gradually gave way to trees. The forest began sparse but quickly thickened, trees packed so tightly that you couldn't see the sky through their canopy. It looked like a solid black wall, a void that consumed the horizon. Emma just stared into that darkness, completely motionless. "What do you see out there?" I asked gently. She didn't answer, so I looked more carefully, trying to understand what held her attention. At first, nothing seemed unusual, just trees and shadows. But the longer I looked, the more I noticed. Movement everywhere, branches swaying, though I felt no wind. Shadows shifting across the grass in patterns that didn't quite make sense. The darkness seemed alive, breathing. "What do you think hides out there?" I asked, trying to make it playful. "In the forest?" "My father," she said simply. "He watches from the trees." I blinked, processing her words. That was disturbing. I know children say strange things, but this felt different. Wrong. "What do you mean, honey?" "What does watches mean?" she asked, her eyes never leaving the window. "Well, watching is when you look at something for a long time, paying close attention. Sometimes people watch things because they're interested. Sometimes because they're waiting for something. Like hiding and looking," she said. "Sort of, yes. So what makes you think your father is out there watching?" Because he is, she stated matter-of-factly. Emma, that's not funny. Your father is at work right now with your mother. I met them both when they hired me. They seemed very nice. I'm not joking. Listen, let's get you back to bed. Your parents will be home in a couple hours, and if they find out you're not sleeping, I'll be in trouble. Come on now. I'm telling the truth, she insisted. Something was at the window earlier too. My stomach dropped. I dismissed my own experience, rationalized it away, but hearing her confirm it made everything feel real and terrifying. That could have been him, Emma added, her voice completely neutral. Stop it, right now, let's go. I took her hand, it was ice cold, and led her back down the ladder to her bedroom. I tucked her in, making sure the blankets were secure, trying to restore some sense of normalcy. Wait, she said as I turned to leave. Don't go yet. I need to tell you something about my dream. Emma, it's really late. Please, you have to listen. In my dream, I was in the garden and it was very dark. You were there too, but you kept trying to leave. You walked to the fence, but the trees had grown over it, blocking your way. And then I found something in the grass, a key. I sat on the edge of her bed, my back to the window, facing the hallway. I hate when people recount their dreams. They're never as interesting as the dreamer thinks. But I stayed because as she spoke, her eyes kept flickering to the window behind me. She'd asked me to look at her, but really, she didn't want me to turn around. I listened to her rambling dream story, watching her face carefully. Every 30 seconds or so, her expression would change slightly. Her eyes would widen just a bit, then relax again. The moonlight coming through the window would dim, casting her face in shadow, then brighten again. Something was passing back and forth outside that window. Emma was keeping me positioned so I wouldn't see it. This 6-year-old child was protecting me from whatever her father had become. When the shadow finally seemed to pass for good, she quickly finished her story. And then I woke up. Thank you for listening. You're welcome, Emma. Try to get some sleep now. Okay, good night. I spent the next hour in the master bedroom, sitting on the floor with my back against the bed, holding that music box I'd stolen. My hands were shaking. I kept listening for sounds, footsteps, breathing, anything unusual, but the house remained silent. The parents arrived home around 12:30. I went downstairs to greet them, studying them both carefully. The mother asked, "How was Emma tonight? Any problems?" "She was perfect," I lied. "No trouble at all." The father smiled. "And how about you? We hope the isolation wasn't too boring." "Not at all. Very peaceful." They offered to drive me home, but I insisted on taking my bike. I needed the fresh air, needed to clear my head. As I left through the front door, though, I didn't head to where I'd locked my bike. Instead, I walked around to the backyard. I had to see something. I had to confirm. I climbed onto the patio fence and pulled myself up onto the porch roof, moving quietly until I was beside Emma's bedroom window. I crouched there, examining the glass. It was covered in scratches, hundreds of thin lines scoring the surface, all running vertically. Like something with claws had been trying to get in, or something inside had been trying to get out. I studied the yard from this elevated position, then the forest beyond. Everything was still and quiet. Then I made the mistake of looking into the master bedroom window. The parents were asleep in bed, but standing in the hallway, just visible through their open door, was something I'd initially mistaken for a coat rack or standing mirror. It had been so perfectly still that my eyes had passed right over it. But now I saw it move, just slightly, a barely perceptible shift. It was impossibly tall and thin, hunched over because the ceiling was too low. Its limbs were elongated, arms hanging down past its knees. The face, if you could call it that, was gaunt, skin stretched tight over a skull. The eyes were too large, too aware. It was looking at the sleeping parents. Then, very slowly, it raised one skeletal finger and began counting them. 1, 2, over and over, like it was making sure they were both there. I don't remember climbing down from that roof. I don't remember getting my bike. I just remember running, sprinting through the darkness, my lungs burning, not daring to look back. I ran until my legs gave out, until I collapsed on my own front porch and pounded on the door until my mother answered. I went straight to my room and wrote everything down because I needed to document it before I convinced myself it hadn't happened. Because here's the detail that made me run, the moment that broke my paralysis. As that thing stood there counting the sleeping parents, it suddenly stopped. Its head turned, slowly, methodically, until it was looking directly at me through the window. And it smiled. Not a human smile, something else entirely. It saw me, and now it knows I saw it. All right, let's move on to our second story. This one comes from a user who experienced something that started as unsettling and spiraled into absolute terror. It's a reminder that sometimes the people closest to us can become strangers, or something worse. The watching wife. My wife has been observing me from corners and doorways. What started as strange has become terrifying. Sarah and I have been together for 7 years, married for 14 months. Our relationship has always been stable, normal, completely free of red flags or concerning behavior. I cannot emphasize enough how out of character this situation is for her. Sarah is practical, intelligent, and grounded. She's never been the type for pranks or childish behavior. Horror isn't her thing. We tried watching The Conjuring once early in our relationship because I'm a fan of scary movies, and she made it maybe 20 minutes before we had to turn it off. She was genuinely frightened and asked me never to suggest horror films again. She's just not into anything creepy or unsettling, which makes what's happening now so utterly bizarre. I should also mention that she's never shown signs of mental illness. It doesn't run in her family, as far as I know. Obviously, some people hide their struggles, but in 7 years together, I think I would have noticed something. Sarah has always been the picture of mental stability. 3 months ago, I was in the kitchen making coffee before work. I was running late and knew I wouldn't have time to stop at my usual coffee shop. As I hurried down the hallway toward the front door, coffee in hand, I happened to glance toward the living room entrance. Sarah was peeking at me from around the corner. Just her eyes and part of her face were visible, the rest of her body hidden behind the wall. Her long blonde hair fell across the doorframe. I nearly dropped my coffee, actually did burn my tongue pretty badly. "Jesus, Sarah," I exclaimed, wiping coffee off my shirt. "You scared me." She immediately ducked out of sight. I heard her footsteps retreating quickly toward the living room. By the time I reached the front door, she was gone. It was weird, definitely out of character, but I also found it kind of amusing. Maybe she was trying to be more playful, less serious. It seemed harmless. I called out that I loved her and jokingly called her weird As I left, I heard her laughing from somewhere in the house. The incident was odd, but nothing alarming. I forgot about it entirely by lunchtime, and when I came home that evening, she was perfectly normal. Neither of us mentioned it. The next occurrence happened 4 days later, around 3 in the morning. I'd woken up thirsty and went downstairs for water. I was standing at the kitchen sink, filling a glass, when I felt an overwhelming sensation of being watched. The feeling was so strong that I found myself looking down at the floor. Sarah's face was staring up at me from the other side of the kitchen island. She was crouched on the ground, her head tilted at an unnatural angle so she could see me under the countertop. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and she was smiling. This broad, exaggerated grin that looked wrong on her face. I screamed. I'm not ashamed to admit it. For that split second, I wasn't just startled, I was genuinely afraid. The moment I screamed, Sarah scrambled backward on her hands and knees, moving with unsettling speed until she disappeared from view. I heard her hands and feet slapping against the tile floor as she retreated. I didn't chase after her. I didn't call out. I just stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. It took me several minutes to work up the courage to go back upstairs. When I finally did, Sarah was in bed, lying on her side, apparently asleep. Or pretending to be. I stood in the doorway watching her breathe, trying to determine if she was faking. Her breathing was slow and steady. I half expected her to suddenly sit up or jump at me, but she didn't move at all. Eventually, I climbed into bed beside her, though sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, over coffee, I decided to bring it up. "What was that about last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light and non-accusatory. She frowned, looking genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" "You were watching me again, from behind the island." I gestured to where I'd seen her. She followed my gesture, then looked back at me and laughed. Actually laughed, like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all week. Her laughter was contagious, and despite my unease, I found myself chuckling too. "You're so weird sometimes," I said. She grinned and hugged me. "You're weird all the time, so we're even." We kissed goodbye and went to work, but throughout the day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way she'd been grinning at me, the speed with which she'd crawled away, the sound of her hands on the floor. It had been deeply unsettling. After that, I started seeing her peeking at me regularly, sometimes from behind the living room couch, sometimes from behind curtains. Once I found her inside an old storage trunk at the foot of our bed. The hinges creaked slightly, giving her away. She'd been watching me through a tiny gap, her eyes gleaming with what looked like childish excitement. It was disturbing. I asked her why she was doing this, but she didn't answer. She just slowly closed the trunk lid, shutting herself inside. I walked away, feeling unsettled and confused. Why was this making her so happy? What was she getting out of it? Sarah didn't peek at me for the following 3 weeks. I started to think maybe she'd grown tired of the game. We were watching television one evening when I jokingly mentioned that I hadn't noticed her spying on me lately, that she must have given up. She looked at me with a slight smile and said, "Maybe I've just gotten better at it." I tried to laugh it off, but her words stuck with me. Was she still watching me without my knowledge? The thought made me paranoid. For the next several days, I found myself constantly checking corners and doorways, looking behind furniture, spinning around suddenly to see if she was there. I felt ridiculous and a bit crazy. After a few weeks without another incident, I convinced myself I was overreacting. It had just been a weird phase, I told myself. People go through strange periods sometimes. Then, 5 days ago, everything escalated dramatically. Sarah had left to visit a friend, so I had the house to myself. I played some video games, watched TV. Around 10 p.m., I decided to take a shower. I was rinsing shampoo from my hair when that familiar feeling washed over me. I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and nearly had a heart attack. Sarah's face was inches from mine, her entire head extended through the shower curtain gap, her body still outside. Her long hair hung in wet strands, dripping onto the shower floor. Her mouth was open in a grotesque, exaggerated smile. Her eyes were bloodshot and bulging, like she hadn't blinked in hours. I screamed and pressed myself against the tile wall. She didn't move, didn't blink. Her smile somehow grew wider, impossibly wide, and her makeup ran down her cheeks in black streaks from the shower spray. We stayed like that for several seconds. Me plastered against the wall, her head protruding through the curtain with that horrible grin. Then, slowly, she withdrew her head, through the semi-transparent curtain. I watched her blurry form back away toward the bathroom door. A moment later, the door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the mirror on the wall. I screamed again and lunged out of the shower to lock the door. Then I just stood there, dripping and shaking for over an hour. Maybe I was overreacting, but I wasn't going to put up with this anymore. Prank or not, this had crossed a line. Eventually, I heard a faint sound through the door, a quiet moan, barely audible. I pressed my ear to the wood, straining to hear. Nothing else. I imagined Sarah standing on the other side, stifling laughter. Anger surged through me. I was tired of being afraid in my own home. "Sarah!" I yelled, pounding on the door. "This is getting insane. Stop it!" I waited for her to respond, to apologize, to say something. But there was only silence. Another 30 minutes passed. I knew I couldn't spend the night hiding in the bathroom, so I finally worked up the courage to leave. I got down on my hands and knees and looked under the door gap. I could see down the hallway to the top of the stairs. No Sarah, no sign of her at all. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or more worried. I stood up, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I was about to unlock it when I heard another sound, that same moan, louder this time, and I realized with horror exactly where it was coming from. I turned my head slowly toward the linen closet next to the sink. Through the small gap where the door was slightly ajar, I saw Sarah's eye staring at me. Her eye was bloodshot and wide, her face pressed against the gap. Her mouth hung open in that same grotesque smile. She was trembling, her whole body shaking with what looked like barely contained excitement. Her hands were clasped against her chest. Another raspy moan escaped her throat, raw and primal. I finally understood. She'd been in the closet the entire time. When I'd heard the bathroom door slam, she'd never actually left. She'd slammed the door from inside the bathroom, then hidden in the closet while I cowered by the locked door. She'd been watching me this whole time. I yanked open the bathroom door and ran. Down the stairs, grabbing my keys and phone from the living room table, out the front door to my car, I could hear her shrill laughter behind me, but I didn't look back. I didn't even close the front door. I just drove away as fast as I could. I was still in my boxer shorts, barefoot, hair wet. I drove straight to my brother Michael's house about 45 minutes away, ignoring every call and text I received. When I finally checked my phone in his driveway, Sarah had called 6 times and sent dozens of messages, all asking where I'd gone and why I'd left so suddenly. I threw my phone against the dashboard in frustration. Her casual tone infuriated me, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't been hiding in a closet watching me with that insane smile. Michael and his wife Jennifer were shocked to see me, especially in just my underwear, but they let me stay without too many questions. Michael lent me clothes and asked what happened. I told him Sarah and I had a fight, but didn't elaborate. I wasn't ready to explain the full extent of her bizarre behavior. They kept suggesting it was probably just a misunderstanding, that Sarah was likely worried about me. If only they knew. I tried to sleep on their couch, but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's face in that closet, her eyes burning into mine. Michael eventually gave me a sleeping pill, which helped me get a few hours of rest, though my dreams were filled with her watching, always watching. I woke up around dawn, my body aching from the uncomfortable couch. I knew I'd have to confront Sarah eventually, but I didn't know what to say. How do you tell your wife that her behavior has become terrifying? That you're actually afraid of her? I was staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out my next move, when that sensation crept over me again. I was being watched. My eyes drifted reluctantly from the ceiling to the window beside the couch. Sarah's face was pressed against the glass, staring down at me with that same gaping smile. Saliva dripped from her mouth, leaving twin trails down the window. I don't know how long she'd been there. Something told me it had been hours, possibly the entire night. I jumped up and slammed my palm against the glass. "Sarah, are you out of your mind? What is wrong with you? Go home." She didn't move, didn't blink. If anything, her smile widened, like she'd never been happier in her life. I could hear Michael and Jennifer moving around upstairs. As if sensing their approach, Sarah's head twitched slightly toward the ceiling. Then, very slowly, she began to close her mouth. Michael called my name from upstairs, clearly concerned. I turned toward him and Jennifer as they hurried down the stairs. When I looked back at the window, Sarah was gone. The only evidence she'd been there were the twin streaks of saliva still sliding down the glass. I tried explaining to Michael and Jennifer about waking up to find Sarah watching me through the window, but they were understandably skeptical. We went outside to examine the spot, but there were no clear footprints in the dirt, just some vague impressions. "Probably an animal," Michael suggested, and I didn't argue. He and Jennifer clearly thought I'd had a vivid dream brought on by stress. I was too exhausted to convince them otherwise. I called out of work that day and spent most of the morning in a state of emotional collapse. I was beginning to believe something was fundamentally wrong with Sarah, something that couldn't be fixed with promises or apologies. By noon, I decided I had to confront her, give her one final chance to explain. After 7 years together, I owed her that much. I turned on my phone and saw dozens of texts from her, all expressing concern and love. "Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Just come home." Every message was short and generic. totally unlike her usual texting style. Sarah normally sent paragraph-length messages for the simplest things. Now, suddenly, she was keeping it brief. It felt wrong. I ended up staying with Michael and Jennifer another night. I didn't wake up to Sarah's face at the window, thankfully. The next day, Jennifer tried gently to encourage me to work things out with Sarah. "I don't want to pry," Jennifer said over lunch, "but is this something that can be fixed? Can you two work through it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "She's like a different person. I don't trust her anymore." "Sarah loves you," Jennifer said. "She seemed absolutely devastated when I saw her." It took a moment for her words to register. "Wait, what do you mean you saw her?" Jennifer looked confused by my reaction. "She stopped by this morning, just after Michael left for work." Dread washed through me. "I didn't see her car." "Maybe she took a rideshare or something. She just asked if you were awake." I said no, and asked if she wanted me to wake you. She said no, to let you sleep. She looked terrible though, like she hadn't slept in days. I felt sick. "She didn't come inside, did she?" "No, we just talked at the door." I immediately checked that all the doors were locked. Sarah hadn't entered the house, but the knowledge that she'd been here, asking about me, was deeply unsettling. I realized then that I needed help, professional help for Sarah. She was clearly unwell, but how could I get her help? If I called the police, what would I even say? That my wife was peeking at me? That she smiled weirdly? None of it constituted a crime, and if I tried to have her involuntarily committed, she could probably act normal enough in front of doctors to be released after 72 hours. I felt lost. Then I remembered someone who might have insight into Sarah's condition. Her mother, Patricia. Patricia and I had never been close. We'd only met twice, both brief visits. She was cold, distant, difficult to connect with. She rarely smiled, and when she did, it never reached her eyes. There was something perpetually defensive about her demeanor. I'd gotten the impression she didn't approve of me, and Sarah had always seemed eager to limit our interactions. We'd moved 3 states away partly to avoid frequent visits. But now, I needed Patricia's help. I needed to know if Sarah had a history of mental illness. Swallowing my pride, I called her. Yes, she answered on the 3rd ring, already sounding annoyed. "Patricia, it's Ben. Do you have a moment to talk?" I could hear her tongue click in irritation. "I'm in the middle of paying bills, but I suppose I can spare a minute." "What do you want, Benjamin?" "It's about Sarah. She's been acting strangely, and I was hoping you might know if there's any history of—" "I'm having trouble following your rambling, Benjamin. What exactly do you want from me?" I could picture her standing in her pristine kitchen, tapping her manicured nails impatiently on the granite countertop. "I wanted to know if you'd ever noticed any unusual behavior from Sarah. Any history of mental health issues?" There was a long, uncomfortable pause. Finally, she spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "I'm not sure if this is some kind of joke, Benjamin, but if it is, I don't find it amusing. Now, as I mentioned, I have matters to attend to. Patricia, it's not a joke. I'm seriously concerned about Sarah's mental health. Her behavior has been extremely erratic. I'm worried about her, and I thought as her mother, you would be too. If you're truly concerned, then I suggest you contact medical professionals. I don't know what you expect from me." Her voice had turned sharp, defensive. "Please, if not for me, do it for Sarah." I heard her take a shaky breath as if she was struggling to maintain her composure. "Benjamin, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there replaying the conversation, trying to understand her refusal to help. Why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter, regardless of how she felt about me? Then I remembered her final words. Seek professional help. She'd said it with unusual emphasis, almost urgency. Was she referring to medical doctors? Or was she hinting at something else? Someone else? I might have been grasping at straws, but I felt certain she'd been trying to tell me something without saying it directly, like she was afraid to speak openly about whatever was wrong with Sarah. After a long discussion with Michael and Jennifer, I convinced them that Sarah genuinely needed psychiatric intervention. I didn't tell them everything. I wasn't ready to share the full extent of her behavior, but I told them about finding her hiding in the bathroom closet, and that was enough to alarm them. They agreed that Sarah needed help, though they didn't think the situation was as serious as I did. They kept suggesting it might just be an elaborate prank. "Maybe for YouTube?" Jennifer offered weakly. Michael didn't think we should involve the police yet. He suggested we go to the house together and try to convince Sarah to seek help voluntarily. I agreed, grateful I wouldn't have to face her alone. We drove to my house this morning, arriving around 10. There was no way I was going there at night. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach churned with anxiety. Sarah's car wasn't there, but that didn't mean she wasn't inside. The front door was slightly ajar. For a terrible moment, I imagined seeing her eyes staring through the gap. I was shaking as we approached. Michael, oblivious to the true horror of the situation, had his hands casually in his pockets. I pushed the door open and was immediately hit with an overwhelming stench of decay. Michael smelled it too, wrinkling his nose in disgust. "What do you guys clean with?" Michael muttered. "This is terrible." "Shut up," I whispered, my eyes scanning for any sign of Sarah. The house was eerily quiet and dark, despite being mid-morning. Every curtain was drawn, blocking out the sunlight. If I hadn't left just 3 days ago, I would have thought the place had been abandoned for months. We moved through each room carefully, checking potential hiding spots. I even looked under furniture, which earned me a confused look from Michael. "Why are you looking under the couch?" he asked. "We're looking for your wife, not a lost remote." "Let's just check upstairs," I said quietly. As we climbed the stairs, I heard glass crunching under our shoes. I noticed one of our wedding photos on the wall had been smashed. The frame hung crookedly, all the glass removed. I stared at the photo, Sarah in her white dress, both of us smiling on the church steps. I never imagined her face could become a source of terror. We checked the spare bedroom first, completely untouched. Then I hesitated at the bathroom door, memories of that night flooding back. Michael noticed my reluctance and offered to check it himself, but I couldn't let him face it alone. We entered together, checking the shower and the linen closet. The bathroom looked exactly as I'd left it that night. "I don't think she's here, Ben," Michael said. "Why don't you pack some clothes and we'll try again tomorrow?" I nodded and went to our bedroom, stuffing clothes into a duffel bag. When I opened our closet, I found the source of the smell. Michael took one look and went pale. He had to retreat to the hallway, hand over his mouth. Arranged on the closet floor, soaking into the carpet, were dozens of eyes. Animal eyes, carefully laid out in pairs. Some were large, like from deer or cattle. Others were tiny, perhaps from mice or birds. All of them staring up at me. "What the hell?" Michael said from the hallway, gagging. "Why would she collect eyes?" "I tried to tell you she needed help," I said, my voice shaking. "She doesn't need help, Ben. She needs an exorcist. Can we please leave? I'm going to be sick." I grabbed my bag and closed the closet door on that nightmare. We headed back to the hallway, both of us desperate for fresh air. I could taste the rot on my tongue. "Who arranges eyeballs in their closet like that?" Michael said, still gagging. "You coming or what?" he called back to me. "I can't stand this smell another—" His words died in his throat. His eyes went wide with pure terror. I didn't need to ask why. I could feel it. Someone was watching me. I turned around slowly, scanning the bedroom. That's when I saw what we'd missed. Under the bed, curled on her side, eyes gleaming with childlike excitement, was Sarah. Her hands were clasped under her chin, trembling with barely contained joy. Now that she knew we'd spotted her, I could hear soft sounds escaping her throat, a sort of hiccuping giggle, like she was too thrilled to contain it. It was deeply disturbing. Everything in me wanted to run, but I forced myself to stay. This was my wife. However twisted she'd become, she was still the woman I'd married. I had to try to help her. "Sarah," I said softly. Her head bobbed in two quick little movements, almost like nodding, but wrong somehow. "I just want to help you, okay? Will you let me do that?" I took a step closer, approaching her like I would a dangerous animal. "I love you, Sarah." She let out a tiny moan, and I had to fight the urge to bolt. Her shoulders were quivering now, her eyes impossibly wide. I crouched down to see her better and immediately noticed the blood. Her hands were covered in it, trembling more violently as I got closer. "Sarah, are you hurt? You're bleeding." Her head bobbed again, her bloody fingers moving up and down like she was playing an invisible piano. They occasionally brushed her chin, leaving red smears on her skin. The smell coming from her was revolting. Not just the blood, but something else, like she hadn't bathed in days. I could feel bile rising in my throat. Her lips were cracked and bloody, stretched into that perpetual grin. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own. I reached out to take her hand, wanting to assess her injuries. Before I could touch her, her hand shot out toward me. Sharp pain exploded in my arm. I fell backward, clutching my forearm as blood dripped onto the carpet. I looked at Sarah in shock and saw her grinning wildly, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. "You okay?" Michael called from behind me. I turned my head and nodded, cradling my bleeding arm. When I looked back at Sarah, her expression had completely changed. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring past me at Michael, her mouth twisted into a snarl, eyes filled with predatory rage. I scrambled to my feet and started backing toward the hallway, afraid to take my eyes off her. "Are you bleeding?" Michael asked. The moment he spoke, Sarah began crawling out from under the bed, the glass shard still clutched in her fist. "Michael, run!" I yelled. "Go!" He must have been too terrified to move because I backed directly into him. He was frozen at the top of the stairs, staring in horror at what Sarah had become. She emerged completely from under the bed and stood in the bedroom doorway. Her body was visibly tense, like a coiled spring. Blood dripped from her fingers onto the floor. Her face twisted with rage, mouth opening wider and wider until her jaw seemed ready to unhinge. "Jesus Christ," Michael whispered. "Sarah, are you okay?" I reached back and shoved him toward the stairs. "Move, now!" Sarah's head twitched in rapid, jerky movements. Then she began grinning again, her mouth stretching impossibly wide. I heard Michael whisper a prayer before he finally turned and ran down the stairs. I stood at the top of the steps, torn between my love for this woman who clearly needed serious help and my own survival instinct. "I just want to help you," I said, tears in my eyes. She slowly lifted the glass shard, holding it out in front of her like a weapon. Then she started running at me, her face alight with terrible joy. My body took over. I flew down the stairs, skipping steps, barely keeping my balance. I felt her grab my back, her arms wrapping around my neck, her mouth next to my ear, making those awful hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off, feeling searing pain across my back as she fell. I tore open the front door and sprinted to my car. Michael was already in the yard, still on the phone with 911. I didn't say a word, just got in my car and started the engine. Michael understood and jumped in beside me, still talking to the dispatcher. I checked the rearview mirror as I sped away, certain I'd see her chasing us. But the street remained empty. I went straight to the emergency room. 11 stitches in my arm, 4 in my back. The police asked questions and went to search the house, but of course Sarah wasn't there. They advised me to stay with friends and file for a restraining order, but I know none of that will matter. I dropped Michael at his house and drove to a motel an hour away. I needed distance. That was 4 hours ago. I thought maybe the police would find her, get her the help she desperately needs. But 40 minutes ago, I received a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words and an attached image. "I found you." The attached photo was dark and grainy, but I recognized it immediately. It was a close-up of an eye. Sarah's eye, staring directly at the camera, or at me. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm alone and terrified, and I can't shake the feeling that even now, even here in this locked motel room, I'm still being watched. All right, that concludes our collection of unexplained Reddit stories for today. I know this is quite different from my usual iceberg content, but I really enjoyed sharing these stories with you. They're disturbing, well-crafted, and genuinely unsettling, whether they're true or creative fiction. If you enjoyed this format and want to see more story narrations like this in the future, let me know in the comments. I find these tales fascinating, and there's no shortage of creepy material on Reddit to explore. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking with me through nearly an hour of horror stories. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. Your support means everything and helps the channel grow. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, stay curious, and maybe check behind you before you go to sleep tonight. See you in the next one.